The title of the show is what again?
It's, well, that's a story, but it's 98 Illusion is the name of the show. And so if you want, I can give you some like context so that you know what we're talking about. It's
Right.
an art show. Yeah, it's an art show. But basically we started this like art collective about, I guess, it would be 4 years ago now.
Maybe a bit closer to them.
So about 4 years ago. And it was when, I think you know this though. But yeah, so basically we started it about 4 years ago. And it was just for the purpose of doing experimental art and just like having as a platform or space to just like try stuff out. And it actually was born out of this class that I took freshman year, Thomas took a freshman year. Yeah, I think you all were also kind of locals.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it was basically a 2-hour like free-form period where we could do anything we really wanted to. And people, by the end of the year, started getting really experimental with everything. And, but then the class ended, and I just felt like, you know, people were just starting to go somewhere with, like, really pushing the limits of, you know, how to, like, mix art together, different mediums together. And so then that's kind of how the 98 was born, out of, like, that necessity to keep creating, but also not to just do it in a classroom, to, like, share it with the community. So yeah, that's kind of how it started, and since then we've done now 7 shows, and they're all interdisciplinary with as many like artists as possible, and all the artists are born in the 90s. So we were gonna put it on the
Yeah, I'm gonna move it around. Whoever talks is gonna get the spotlight, okay? I think that's probably gonna be better for actually a little recording then too. You see that now?
And then we'll just shift it.
And then we just shift it when the next one goes on, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's experimental? Like, can I ask questions?
Yes, you should ask questions.
So, like, what kind of material?
So, because we have so many artists, each artist kind of has their own medium, and so some people will, like, you know, paint, and some people will, you know, play music or do theater performance. And, so it's experimental in that it's also an environment for these artists who maybe have a traditional medium to like push it and kind of blend it with different mediums that are around them. And that's partly, I guess, my role is just connecting artists together in the space and say, like, both of you are interested in this theme, but you play music and you paint. What if you like brought that together and did a piece together? And then like one learns about the other form and vice versa. And then, you know, yeah, it just gets, and it's also like, because there are no rules really. Hello.
Hi.
Right. Because there are no rules, it just allows for a lot of freedom and to try things that like I think in a normal gallery space, it might appear to be not accepted. And also fully acknowledging that certain experiments fail, and like that's just a part of it. But it's better to just like try it, which I think you did say at the end of the documentary. Every idea worth what was
Worth
it?
exploring. Any idea that you might have is worth exploring because it's about the exploration. The exploration in and of itself is what we're trying to get into the space or our virtual space as we have it online. My favorite thing about like 98 and what we've done here is there's always a conversation between, like you just said, 2 artists who have like 2 different mediums. So I was doing the 3D modeling for everything. Whenever I ran into an obstacle with 3D modeling that I wanted to resolve with an artist, I would like have a prolonged conversation about it, about what we're trying to like get, and if it needed to be approached the same way they had approached it with their hands while I'm doing like a mouse and a keyboard.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we want to actually maybe look at a couple of things?
Yeah.
So that we have a little bit of a context.
Yeah, for sure.
Visual context.
Yeah, and
That
I
would be
can
really
also
cool.
kind of explain. So, while I want me to pull it up.
Yes, please.
Okay. Hello. And so I'll just share the screen. While I'm pulling it up, so this show was about illusion versus reality. And we were originally going to have the show in person, but then because of coronavirus and the adjustments that we had to make with everything, and TJ, who's on this call, was very instrumental in this, but we decided to translate the show to a virtual space. And so he had a scan of the venue, like a 3D scan of the venue that we were going to originally have the show in. And so we just decided to insert the pieces virtually in the show so that people could access them. And Landine's role in that, if you want to expand.
Yeah, so anybody who had like a three-dimensional sculpture or something that you would interface with just from multiple planes of view, we didn't want to just have like pictures of that because you only get part of the experience that way. I had all the artists that wanted something three-dimensional send me sort of pictures of the thing they had made in a bunch of different directions and dimensions of those things, and they sent it to me. And then in software called AutoCAD, I created those same things digitally. Maybe not precisely how it originally was, just because there are some limitations in that program that don't allow me to do that to an exact scale. But it was really fun to sort of see what they're representing and how we could represent it and maintain the integrity of the original thought, but without having the medium that they initially started with. So that was really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can take everyone kind of through the gallery. Yeah, if you want to like turn closer to see it. Okay. And so TJ is going to be laughing because he's seen this so many times. But this is kind of what the space. This is kind of what the space looked like. And so this is a real space. It's a virtual reality arcade.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, I see like arcade stuff. I think.
Yeah, there's like all this equipment, and so you can like kind of see all of that still.
But it's really within a space installed and then made into a virtual reality.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, yes. So what we did is these little tags here are like each of the pieces, and so this is a welcome video that we don't need to watch.
What software you use to put the
This is a software called Matterport. Matterport, yeah.
MATT?
Yeah, it's right, Matterport. And this was a,
It's often used by like retail people not retail, real estate people to sell
Oh, yeah.
apartments and such.
I just saw some of those.
yeah. And so we did have a discussion of like what would be the best way to create, you know, this virtual space, because there are some other options out there, but we thought for accessibility's sake and just because this is the first time we're trying this, Matterport would be a really good option. So you can kind of click through.
You have to pick that a little bit.
TJ was in charge of this bit of it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You do have to, TJ, can you confirm, like, you do have to pay for the, right?
Yeah, so it's a monthly subscription usually, and I think you can get one space for free, I believe, but as Lundeen said, a lot of these real estate companies use this for like multiple listings. But it's anywhere from like $10 to $50 a month, depending on like how many spaces you want and like what you want to do with them.
Right. Yeah, and so we also color coded the tags, so like all the videos are purple. And then here's an example of, and Lundeen, do you want to take us through one of the...
Yeah. So this tag here. This is somebody had created an altar. Her name is Ivy, great artist. And so I drafted this model.
You created a what?
She created an altar that is
Oh, okay.
sort of just an at-home candles, tarot cards. And so she had created it at home and just with household objects that she had. And then was like, well, we now can't bring that to the space the way we wanted to. So how can we do that? And we can actually open that up, see that further. And so I took the photos that she gave me of it, the dimensions of the things that she gave me, and created that.
So it's more like a sculpture, like an AutoCAD sculpture.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh.
So that object now is not in the space. It's really now implemented by you.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and then if we go to the second floor,
And can I ask one more question about that? And that person, for example, also now worked with somebody else, or that was somebody you collaborated with? You know, because you said that there's often like this collaboration going on between the two artists.
So you
Oh,
were
no. So it was just me and the artist. There was nobody else involved in the creation.
Okay.
if we go to the second floor, just pop up like this. It's pretty cool. And so here's another. Want to talk about this? Was a little more challenging.
Yeah,
right?
that was so much more challenging because a lot of the pieces that I'd been sent before this piece were either handheld objects or somebody had drafted it in like sort of right angles or things that had been manufactured, like this chair, that mug, that generally tend to get made with like basic shapes. But these were organic hands that are like, created by nature, which is a lot harder to recreate on a digital scale unless you're like an insane professional. And so this took a lot more time and figuring out how to make hands and plants and even the organicness of this string. And I believe Delaney has a more in-depth explanation of what her piece was about. I don't want to like try to tackle that with my words. But yeah, this is how we ended up doing that. And it's sort of made to be mounted on a right angle of the corner somewhere. And so I created this little right angle wall here and then mounted the closest approximation that I could get to the hands that she had sculpted, because those were molds of her actual hand. So I couldn't hope to get exactly what her hand looked like. That would have taken decades. But I got the closest approximation that I could. And that's how we got here.
You couldn't use the same technology that was used to create the room in 3D to re-render the object?
Scanners that involve that are incredibly expensive, and we just didn't have that money.
So this company that makes that software already had this particular place in
No, so that was TJ. If you want to hop on and explain like how you scan the space, TJ, feel free. But go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So basically, Matterport comes or sells their own 3D scanner, but you could even do this with like a 360 camera that's much less expensive. But essentially, you're walking around the space, and every 5 to 10 feet or so, you're taking another scan. And then what the software does is kind of takes all those scans, puts them together, and gives you that dollhouse that you saw while we were opening.
Yeah. So why didn't you do the same thing with the artwork then?
Sure. So it's a different process. So the Matterport technology specifically is for spaces, right? So it's not for objects, where objects are much more detailed and take, I think it's like vertices is like what you're working with. So the more vertices there are, the harder it is to store that information. So it's like a data problem, but it's also like a processing thing. And like Lundeen said, to do that correctly, to actually represent the art well, would be expensive.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So tell me a little bit more about the concept of the theme.
Yeah. So every single show, we have a different overarching theme, and it's phrased as a question, and then we ask all the artists to answer that question whatever way that they feel they want to. Even if that means dodging the question, like that's a statement in its own right. And so I was just thinking a lot about, you know, in my personal life, there was just this like incident that happened. It's really not a big deal, but at a party where I really thought I heard something, and it wasn't even like a significant phrase, and I didn't. And someone was like, no one said that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I was so confused and shocked and was like, how I actually remember with my whole body this thing happened. And then I'm being told like that never happened. So then I had this kind of mini crisis of like, can I trust my own self and my own senses? And so that was in my personal life, and I noticed that a lot of my friends were asking similar questions of like, you know, how do I know if I can trust my own like body and my own memory and my instincts and things like that. And then I was like looking in the media and seeing how much misinformation was out there, and you know, we were all asking these questions of like, how can we trust our media? How can we trust our government? How can we trust, you know, the people that are supposed to represent us? And so that's kind of how the theme came into play, where I thought it would be interesting to question, or to ask the artist to question, like, how much of what's going on around us is illusion and how much of it is like real, and what can we trust and what can't we trust? And so we got all of our artists together and basically just had, sorry.
I don't have coronavirus.
Okay.
Like no smoking cigarettes.
I understand. Yeah, so we got all our artists together and just had a big brainstorm about the theme, and then just went from there, just kept like, you know, developing. And then I think like with coronavirus and with a lot of the major world events that unfolded, the theme just became more relevant, I think. And so the way I think the artists were portraying their pieces shifted to also, in a way, comment on what was happening. And so it was cool that their pieces took on different meaning with the evolving context that was happening around. So, yeah. And yeah, so with that, after COVID happened and we did this online gallery, we also decided to document the process of turning the show into an online show, but also for their artists, like their process and how they created their pieces remotely. So what we did is we instructed all of our artists to film themselves remotely, wherever they were, using their phone or their laptop, or if they had a professional camera and anything like that. And we compiled that footage together to make kind of a documentary, but it was experimental. So the documentary itself was commenting on illusion versus reality. And the purpose of that was to make the audience question like whether what they were seeing in this documentary was factual or real, or whether it was like absurd and it was an art piece and it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it seems like just the act of making the CAD drawings, you're making it unreal. In a way, you know what I mean? Like, so is that part of why that's part of the
The way I like, from my like stance sitting at my desk at home while everything was sort of happening at everybody else's desks at home or what have they, I feel like there was like this immediate decision that was made in all of us without even really realizing it. Is like, we're going to take the illusion of like an actual place, put it in your home for you to consume while you're at home and can't really go anywhere. Which I feel like is everything that we do now. And when I say now, I don't mean like the wider now of like the past couple of years. I mean like now in the quarantine where we're like, we don't have any way to consume things outside of our phone without stress, or like our computer without stress. And so it was this like approach to the gallery that was like, here's something that you would do on a normal day-to-day basis, where you go to a place, consume all this art from all these wonderful people, and then go back home with it. now it comes to you and you consume that in your seat. And none of it is actually there.
Yeah. And it's
So
also
like the altar, for instance, did she have like a bunch of writing? Like the altar is an answer to your question, right? Like what's real? So
Yeah.
is it? I'm curious to see more of the art, like this.
yeah, I can like pull it back up. And I think the concept behind that piece was was about like spirituality and like how much of religious belief is illusion and like how much do we project meaning onto that, which is really interesting. And so originally we had talked about for this altar inserting little placards with questions like what do you see? Because we were commenting on like everyone's going to have to see something different in this altar because they're going to pull meaning from different objects depending on what impacts them in their life. So we wanted to have a little book for people to write down what they saw, and then just kind of that's a comment on its own about like and like new people will come up to this thing, look at it, and see like, oh, I saw something completely different.
It's interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine about media. He's a computer scientist, and I'm an artist and designer. So I was like, what do you like? Give me some clues. I have to define media. What's media arts? And his answer was really interesting. What I hadn't heard. He said, well, media is plural of medium. So medium, when he went to school to get his computer science degree, his actual degree was through the media arts program, through some kind of, I don't know, somehow, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he defined medium, and he right away started thinking about technology, like we have these, social media is a medium that we interact with, so the medium that you use is, it was just an interesting stretch, because it is, now media is something so much different. Like as artists, we work with materials and medium. And technology is such a medium in itself that it does try to get you more sensory, I mean, supposedly, artificial intelligence. And I had a VR headset on recently, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Looking around, and somebody else was in the same virtual space I was in, and he looked over at me, and it freaked me out. We were actually at a comedy club, a live comedy show. It's like one of the settings you could choose on this $400 VR headset. Like there's some porn that comes with it, some live things, and then just other relaxing experiences that you have to do little tasks, and the whole environment like calms you down. But we went to this live comedy show where I was looking at these people who were in the comedy show, and apparently there was like a couple cameras set up, and my virtual reality headset went into this camera that allowed me to look around at the real people and then at a virtual person who then looked at me and waved. And he was a avatar and I was an avatar, and my heart jumped because I could feel I was like, oh my God. I was like, get me out of here. I took this thing off. It was so weird.
Yeah.
It was really wild.
Yeah.
So it makes you think about like, how do we use the new mediums of technology to experience, like what are our senses,
But I think that is also really probably for us a lot harder than for you guys because it's much more interwoven, right?
Yeah, I feel like we're sort of born into this world where much of our like social interaction, much of our like interactions in general happen online. And so to see that happen, like if I were to see somebody wave over to me, like in a VR like Wonderland, and be like, oh, that kind of makes sense. This is kind of how I interact already. And that like doesn't feel like an illusion anymore, but totally is. Like it is absolutely like not real, but it is real to me.
But there's like real senses that we do have that stretch into the virtual world. Like there's this concept of an egregore. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard the word.
An egregore is like a really interesting concept that I first heard of through like witchcraft and stuff. And it's basically the energy that comes together under a group or a relationship, like your relationship is the egregore. It's not you, it's not the other person, it's this thing you've created through whatever. And that egregore has like an energy and a power kind of into itself. And you can control it, but when you think of people's avatars or profile pictures or images on social media, that in a way is an egregore that does have a very powerful energy.
Yeah.
And it's controlled very much by things that maybe aren't so desirable, you know, like in our consumer world, ego and things. So in a way, it is like this mirror of fractals where we aren't even real. Like we're these souls that like are almost in our own. So it's interesting to think about how these old ideas like Buddhism and egregores can interface with technology.
Yeah.
And you think about like, you think about, you know, the mimicking of wires and networks and our bodies and, you know, it's just.
That reminds me of like, when I remember when I was in, I think it was grade 11, I'm Canadian, so it's grade 11, in high school, and I studied this theater theorist named Antoine Artaud, and he wrote about this idea of metaphysics in theater, and it blew my mind, and it kind of was reminding me about what you're talking about, where it's like, in theater at least, the metaphysical world is the space between a word and then like the true meaning of the word, like whatever cannot be expressed, because words are just symbols of concepts, I think. And so that like space in between, that like, I guess egregore is the word.
Yeah,
It's like, it's a tension, it's like an energy, and it's living. Like I really believe that. I know we're getting off topic here, but it's just so interesting. Like words, like that relationship and that energy will constantly evolve and accumulate with every single instance it's used in a way. And I think that translates not only just with words, but with, you know, concepts and themes and our interpersonal relationships. And so it's just so interesting how that is a constantly evolving thing.
So it's true, yeah, it gains energy and things, you know, over time and changes over time.
And with like the introduction of a virtual world, like that's gonna add a whole different tension and meaning to these like old, you know, like what you were saying, like these ancient concepts.
When you start thinking about artificial intelligence and morality and it's crazy.
Right. So the one thing that actually I feel like is like that's like getting off that topic again a little bit again, but I wanna just get back to this concept of being really young, right? I mean, it's not just a concept; you are really young, but of having a show with all the same age, right? You guys are all. Is pretty much. You're probably not.
Yeah,
it means it's like between 20.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're in your 20s?
Yeah.
So what you know, like, I feel like there's so much energy right now in young people, right? And
Is there? But you're so tired.
I think so.
I would actually disagree. I think young people are given too much. It's too much pressure. I feel like they need the old people because we kind of know, you know, and you guys know too. And you guys, by definition, are smarter than us because you're the next evolution. Like my daughter, like our kids are always an improvement of us. So you know something extra, but.
No, but I think especially lately, I think even in the last few months, right? I feel like that has gone definitely. There has been a switch, right, between the lazy teenagers to like they're actually really organizing, like and doing things that are really, really.
By the time you're
getting
30,
us
you're
off
gonna
the ground,
feel old
right?
And like, oh, it's too late. So like your 20s, you know, really, like you're just getting started in your 40s and 50s. But you know, the pressure's on in your 20s. Everyone thinks you're supposed to do everything in your 20s. So good job. Get it going.
Anyway, so what do you expect? Like, what do you think that like a show like this can do, or what could you like it to kind of like make happen?
I think actually thought about this a lot because of what's happening with coronavirus and specifically New York. You know, having just graduated, and please like feel free to chime in, it feels like I have to, you know, I immediately had this feeling of like, okay, I gotta get a job, I gotta like, you know, work. And that's nearly impossible right now. But I was still like really trying to hustle. And so I was trying to like, you know, connect with institutions, with different institutions, which included open source. But what I found with like a lot of the more traditional, like bigger institutions is that there was a complete and total panic of like, what do we do? Art is dead. Like the amount of times I heard this phrase, art is dead, just completely like, the opposite. Really blew my mind. Exactly, because what comes with these intense restrictions should be more intense art. Like it actually being forced to play within these lines will actually result in more innovation. Right? And so I think I want to show, especially like older, and not everyone's doing this, but there's a lot of like older artists who just don't know what to do. So they're putting their hands up and they're like, well, just wait. I don't know. And it's like, no, we need to take advantage of this time. We like have to be more creative now more than ever. And so I hope that this show will inspire that. Will show like, yeah, like you can't do a show in person, do it virtually, like adapt with the times. And it doesn't mean like push yourself into a language that you don't fully understand. But to be honest, like I am not very like technologically comfortable, let's say. But, and I felt like I really learned a new language with the show, like working with Lundeen, working with TJ, but even working on the documentary, like I didn't even know how to use Final Cut Pro, like the editing software. I was using iMovie before this time, and you evolve and you adapt, and I think like, and maybe it's because we have the energy to do that, maybe that is it, but it just feels like impossible, especially as an artist. Like, I don't know what I would do if I stopped. Like, I can't. Like, my soul would deteriorate if I just stopped trying. So I'd rather try and fail than just, like, stop altogether and just wait. Because it's just such lost time. But do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this sort of, like the 98 in general, like why I got really interested in joining you on this. It's like, it didn't feel like it was really attached to our like biologically, per se, more like to the sliver of experience that we have from like being born in the late 90s or mid 90s or just the 90s in general, and then growing to this point, we have like a different set of experiences that came at really odd times in our development. Like if you're like American, you lived through like the inauguration of the first Black president and like saw like all the like racism that accompanied that, and then all the changes that accompanied that, and then you also lived through the election of Donald Trump, which is like polar opposite of that. And we experienced those things at like pretty young ages. Like I was just starting college, and I feel like with our youth comes this sort of like you were just saying, that we're more active just as a generation. We like have our finger on the trigger just ready to go at all times. And it's because I feel like we think we have to, and that comes as a result of being so attached to like the illusion that is media. Like we're so educated all the time about every single thing that comes toward us. And I think 98 does a really good job of having all those people who are so constantly aware come together and create something in reaction to that. Or maybe not even reaction, but in subconscious reaction to that. Yeah. And so I think it's really important, especially now, because this is just another event that we are living through at a very young age, to bring that out there and say, here's what we're going through, here's what we're thinking about, and we have to do that in this medium because here's what we're going through.
Yeah, and also adding to like the sliver of experience phrase that you said, I think we also have, young people have a sliver of experience with like actually just making art, because we've only been alive for so long and only been making art for so long, as opposed to an older artist who's been doing it for 40 years. You know, it's like I just started trying out like using Adobe After Effects and making animation, and so so it's almost easier, I think, when you're younger to produce a lot of content and make a lot of art and just kind of throw something out there and throw another thing out there. You know, I know that like one of my dad's friends who's an artist, he's like probably in his 60s now, but he's like he can never finish a painting anymore. And I'm not saying that's like the case for all artists as they get older, but I think that is something that can happen because you can kind of lose your creativity as you've been doing it for so long. So and I think with the 98, that's one of those things where it's a lot of people aren't even like, you know, definitely not professional artists, so they haven't even made that much art before, but they have an idea and Malika reaches out and like maybe links them up with someone else and so they can make some cool piece for like the first time. You know?
So how does actually the selection work? How do you do that? So people reach out to you or?
A little bit of everything. I mean, I will reach out to people, and the 98 started truly with just people around me, like my friends, and Thomas was actually there, like he was one of the first people involved. And it was like seven or eight people, like in the parking garage or something like that. And it was just like people in our
I remember that. That is a cool show. It was awesome.
Yeah, in the abandoned parking garage of our school. And so that's kind of how it started. But then, as 98 grew, it was like I would reach out to people, or Instagram, you know, whatever it is, like became a big tool for that. Or people would just kind of like, you know, some people I would just meet on the street. And I have this horrible habit of any time I have any conversation with a new person, I just blurt out, I have an art collective, and you should do something for it. And so that actually, you know, and of course the first reaction is, oh, I'm not an artist. And I'm like, yeah, if you can move forward and backward, like you can make art. Like anyone can make a statement, you know? And so, yeah, that's kind of like it. And now we have a network. We've also traveled. 98 has traveled to different places. And so working with local artists and just like making an effort to do that. And then, you know, they might have a friend who's across the world that wants to submit something. And so it's just kind of like evolved organically after that point. And now we have a network of like over 100 artists all around the world who don't necessarily participate in every show, but the especially if I feel like really passionate about someone participating, I'll just really bug them about it, and hopefully, you know, yes. So, but yeah, that's kind of how. But and the biggest rule for me is I never, ever, ever will say no. If someone wants
You
to
have
do it,
some similarities to say.
yeah, you never said no to me.
Can you like just describe some of the more awesome like art projects or moments like that happen either in school or after?
Yeah.
That stand out?
There's definitely like a best of 98 kind of highlight reel in my brain at least. I think, well, so I'll say the very first 98 experiment that we did in the parking garage was really cool. It was like, we got these massive sheets of paper and laid them out on the ground, and Elizabeth was there too. And I basically, there were like 4 people that I just gave some pieces of charcoal to, and I made them get on the pieces of paper and just like move and just draw. And then, so there was like half the people were just moving and just using whatever was in the space, because there was a lot of junk in the garage, so I was like, you know, use it. And then like the other half of the people were documenting, so that's what Thomas did way back when. Like took my camera and just like went around. Do you want to talk about that?
I don't remember the details of it too much, but yeah, I do remember I had a camera and yeah, just kind of filming documenting everything that was happening, which I haven't never seen that footage.
I'll show it to you.
Which I just realized, so that would actually, I'd really like to see that again. And that would, yeah, that would be interesting to kind of remember that night. But I more so just remember like the atmosphere of the space. It was such a unique space that we worked in. It was a parking garage that like no one technically owned, but it was in one of the buildings that like our school owned. But like that was just kind of like this free space, and so there's graffiti all over the walls and like old like rotting cars and just dust everywhere and stuff. But so it was a cool space to kind of just create like whatever you wanted, and so it definitely had that experimental like no rules sort of feel to it.
Yeah. And what actually happened, which was cool, and this is an example of how the show's evolved, is that footage that Thomas has never seen was then taken by this girl who's also, you know, always been involved with 98, Tatiana Webster, who Thomas works with now closely on music stuff. And she edited it together. And then the next show, which actually also happened in the parking garage, that wasn't a show. I would say that was more just like an experimental moment. But the next show, we lined up all these laptops and then played that video on loop. And then people walked around and were, oh, I think you're getting a FaceTime call. Yeah, so that was kind of cool. So then that became part of the next show. Other really interesting things that have happened is 98 Light. We had this, it was so cool. We had this band that was improvising an entire set, and they were really great. And we had one of those old swan arm projectors, and basically put water-soluble paint on top of the like screen where you put like a document, and leaned a brush against it, and then basically projected onto the band, and we had them wear white. So they were like playing, and then the audience would come up and paint them using the projector, and that was a really, really cool moment for sure. In 98 Identity, which was the first show that we had with a venue, there was something called the Rain Room. So the whole event was very like loud and chaotic, and then there was this side room that was soundproof that we filled with like steamers, or like what are those called?
Phasers.
No, it was like steam, like you know, not a smoke machine, like what you would use, something like that.
We did that
Diffuser.
Oh.
Yeah, like a diffuser. And we filled it with essential oils, and it was very steamy. And and then we like had blue and green lighting in it, and then just had a little pedestal with a book. And so people, when they felt overwhelmed in the show, they would just go in there and hang out, and it was like really, really warm. And yeah, and then people would like write in the book, like just. It was just like a moment of peace where they would just write in the book.
It's interesting you're working in this way, like where you're really working together. Like it seems like all the artists are like and just thinking of you know, the similarity in technology, how you guys and your generation is all like separated physically but connecting through media. Yeah. That in a way you're recreating this. Like through your experience, it's almost like you're recreating like it's different. It's not. It's
very open source.
Yeah.
You're working within the theme. Like the theme is like getting created as you're doing the art.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think like the freedom. I think the most important thing is the freedom, even around the theme. Because sometimes there will be the spontaneity, and that this is another like huge. It used to be very frustrating, and now it's my favorite part of, you know, being involved with 98, which was, you know, all the artists work in very different ways, including myself. And so with some artists need structure, like a lot of structure. They need to be guided every step of the way. And then other artists will come to me and will say like, see you the day of, bye, and then I won't hear from them, and then they'll come with like an amazing piece. And some artists will drop out the day of, will come up to me and be like, yeah, some piece in that like space that you set aside, like, sorry, you know, and it's crazy, but it's the most adaptable, and it taught me like the importance of adaptation, I think. And you know, and thematically, I've had artists that have been like, I don't want to comment on this theme. I want to just bring in my own piece, but then I actually kind of enjoy that because I'm like, the audience can learn that there was a moment where you saw this theme and rejected it, and like that's a comment in itself.
Like a counterpoint.
It's a counter. Yeah, exactly. And so I think the freedom actually allows it to be really cohesive. We walk through the space. Yeah.
And most artists also, I mean, you guys seem to be very, very open to all of these things, but since you're working with so many artists that you also just meet on the street or like, you know, like don't really have that big relationship with yet.
Yeah.
Is it always that easy to collaborate like this and make it as you know?
I'll say that Malika and I didn't really know each other before I'd just come off of, so I went to school for technical production, which is like, I build scenery for stages. And I just got out of that. I was like wearing my steel toes and like in my like sawdusty outfit, and like I was walking down the street and she was like, hey. I was like, hi. So I like recognized her. She was like, you should work on 98. And I was like, I'm not an artist. Like, but sure. And so a couple weeks after that, I was like, I will work on this. And I think it's just extending a hand. Because I wouldn't have done this if you didn't extend a hand. And I did nothing of what I normally do on this. I found the skills that I like could contribute to put something toward the sort of the aggregate, like you said, and like be part of that community. And I think for me personally, a lot of that is owed to the structure of theater, because it's not, nobody has like one thing that they're trying to say. It's a bunch of artists who come together and put something on a stage. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, you were there like the first show, but this last, for the documentary, I kind of like was like, edit this part, and you said yes. And so like, what was it like for you to jump in, and did you feel like you were still part of a collaborative team and process?
In that specific case, I did feel like I was part of a collaborative team, knowing that there was a bunch of other people in the exact same boat that I was. There was 5 editors for the document.
And we basically just gave these editors a ton of footage and said, go, like, do it.
Each person had like their specific, like sort of like part of the documentary. Like the documentary was broken into its own themes. So I had like my theme, and I knew other people had the other themes. And everyone had a unique set of footage from artists that they were getting. So no one was like editing footage from the same artist. I had like 4 artists that I was editing together and trying to create like a thematic through line. And then other people were doing their own thing. So it was a completely independent process, but I think it still felt, I still sort of, I felt that I was a small piece of like the whole, and so I was contributing in that way.
Right.
So it felt like, I still felt as though this was definitely a collaborative piece that I was doing. So, and there was probably less pressure on me too, knowing that like other people are handling these other like parts of the way. Whereas if I was the sole editor for the whole documentary, then it would feel different, and it would feel more like my own baby, and I'd probably feel more like less of a collaboration environment if that was the case. So.
Yeah, but I think like I think trust is also a huge part of like, especially with these like random people that I meet on this. Like that happened when 98 went to Oakland, California. That was the most amount of people that I just found like outside, like on walk. I didn't know anyone, so I was just there over the summer, like la la la, like walking around like aimlessly, and that's kind of how the whole. I wasn't even anticipating on doing a show there, but I can't keep my mouth shut, I guess. So it just happened, and I just saw this girl like who had the same camera as me, and I just had this weird, and maybe it's that agregorical connection that I was tapping into. But I felt like I can trust you, and I want to trust you. And even if you do something crazy, that's then just going to be a part of it. And like I'm excited. That's exciting to me. The uncertainty. It's like that's also where the creativity comes in. Yeah. And so, you know, when you bring people up, I think the most important part of the process, which kind of makes sure it ensures everyone is aligned, is the brainstorm around the theme. It's like, in an ideal world, everyone will come into this room, or, you know, maybe a virtual room, and then we'll all just shoot the shit about this theme. And because everyone's listening to, it's an exercise in listening as much as, you know, talking, thinking. You don't even have to say anything if you don't want to. You can just be a sponge and absorb. But I think that actually creates, you know, makes sure that everyone is on the same page. So then when we all split up and start creating our pieces, subconsciously, that conversation will stay with the artist, and that's the most magical part of the show. Like, me feeling really like, ooh, like everyone is doing a lot of different stuff. Like, I wonder how this is going to feel. But then being in this space and actually realizing, like, wait, this is like super cohesive because everyone is aware of each other energetically.
I'm just curious, because I'm an art teacher and I teach high school, and the brainstorming is the part that my high school students, they cannot, it's very hard for them to like get past. Like, they come up with an idea, like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, no, like, you know, lots of ideas, bad ideas. Can you explain, like, maybe how that evolved? Like, you said that's the most important part. Like, how did that change over time, like, so that it actually works? Or what part of it really makes it work?
Yeah, I think, like, taking the pressure away from coming to a brainstorm with the final product, like, that's the most important part. And so, actually, even if
So you put the theme out there or the question out there, and they think about that, and then they come to the brainstorm?
yeah,
Okay.
and I'll often bring source material, like my own influence, that'll be pretty random.
When you come to the first meeting?
Yeah, like we did for the show that we did in London, which is called 98 Spiral. So the word spiral, it's like not as obvious as like 98 Illusion. So they had this image of spiral, and then I told them that the show was about this concept of liminality.
And you emailed this beforehand?
Yeah.
So that's what they're thinking about.
Yeah,
That's
so
the
they like
outside part.
are seeing like pieces, like just fragments of things. But then, you know, I'll bring this like explanation of the rites of passage. I was just thinking about this because I was reading yesterday in the paper an article about liminality. So maybe I would bring that article.
But do other people bring stuff also to the brainstorm?
Maybe, like if they want to. Not usually, but you know, everyone has association with where they would, even if they don't physically bring something, they'd be like, oh, this makes me think of an article I read yesterday in the newspaper. And then I'll say like, oh, could you send that article in, and we'll just like, you know, compile it or send it to everyone, or like pull it up on your phone and read something from it or something like that. But I think, you know, really just making sure that they're talking about the theme and not anything concrete about like what materials am I going to use. Like, we'll have those conversations later. But, you know, I think texture, like what's the texture of this thing, is a good question, because you can answer that in a very general, it's a feeling, or maybe someone will interpret that as like, which feels, you know, really rigid or dry, and then that will help like source material for something
So
later.
like, I found that, because I know questions, like, that's a great way to start an art project, and in my classroom I do that too.
Yeah.
But it's so, I would often find like I have to come up with exactly the right wording. So,
Yeah.
or not giving too much info, or so
Yeah.
how do you, like, are you giving people literally one image and a sentence, a question, a paragraph, or how much do you?
I guess I give the question of the show. So like
Just one question.
one question. So like, okay, I'll run you through some of the past ones. Like, what is romantic about the moment that we're living in? 98 romanticism. And then the next one, like, what does identity mean in this moment, and how is that different from 10 years ago?
I love how specific that is. It's really important to have specific,
Yeah,
not just what's romance or what's love, but right now.
right now.
It's
Yeah,
funny, like, I always would teach kids, but the little ones, it really open because they have so much creativity, like, and then the older they get, they're a little more specific, and then it opens up again.
well, that's what kind of like what you were saying. Like the older you get, the less freedom that
Right.
I think we have
Right.
in terms of even the way that we think.
Right.
Because we learn to constrain ourselves
Yeah.
from a young age, and then we spend the rest of our life trying to unlearn.
Right, exactly. Yeah, totally. Very true.
So that's really good. So what's romantic about the age we live in and the other one?
Yeah, and it's always like about the moment that we're living. Because that's
Right.
kind of
Identity. What does identity mean like right now as opposed to 10 years ago?
That's like always the super important question. I remember one of my favorite classes was like scene design, and every time you like pick up a show and you're like, I want to design this show, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this show now? Or like, why are we doing this now? Why are we thinking about this now? Because it forces you to think about and be present in your current moment.
It's such a good.
and then also goes to show like, we all studied theater in school, and now I guess we're on different paths from theater. Like you're animating, I'm definitely way more into like curation and the visual art world. You're like doing design, set design, and different things like that. But that's not like directly possible right now. So you're using those skills in different applications. And so it's just. But we do, I feel, and maybe you guys can speak to this, I still feel like I bring theater and that learning and into everything, into any different pursuit. Like there's always a touch of that little, theater theatrical flair to it. Because we learn a vocabulary, I think, and then that,
Like, what are some of the more interesting concepts from theater that you bring in?
for me, it's like movement. Because I think movement was like the most influential class that I took in school, and through that class, we were trained to just see movement in everything. Like we even had classes where we would just go and observe the world around us, and then write an entire paper on like right now I'm staring and I actually have the thought about like there's so much movement. There's the movement of the wasps or bees or whatever, like weaving, and then the cars are going this way, so it's like, directional qualities. That is beautiful. That is like a dance, And so I feel like I gained the freedom to find like theater and movement in everyday things, and then like creating, or I guess in any direction I go in, but let's say in a show like this, it's about accentuating that movement naturally. So like when I curate a show and there's a flow to the space, I want to pull out the movement that's already happening within the pieces, within the relationship between the pieces, and like the space itself. And like that's how I kind of, what I've always pulled from theater. What about?
I'd say the group of people that you were with when you try to create something or complete a task is the most important thing. Like I've clocked that repeatedly. There's every time you build a set, it's a different group of people, and that different group of people achieves different things for that piece of scenery than like the last group of people or the next group of people. And it's so applicable in like every single situation. Like if we were having this talk and it was none of us but a bunch of other people, it would be a completely different talk. We wouldn't have touched on any of the subjects that we touched on. And like
So think the personalities as opposed to the structure that's
or even the end goal. Like what we're trying to put on is not really what's going to be put on, because the thought process at the beginning of like we're going to do this can happen to any group of people, but each of those groups of people is going to have a different end product. So that's always my favorite thing that I've definitely learned repeatedly through theater.
And with movement, like the movement class that we took, like she was talking about, definitely that class was a lot of like play. It was a lot of like our teacher like throwing words at us to respond to, which is kind of similar to what she was describing with the like brainstorming sessions, So and that class was, as opposed to other theater classes like acting or voice and speech, that one felt a lot more just kind of spontaneous, always spontaneous, which is definitely what I think the 98 projects always feel like. And then you also talked about liminality earlier, which was a term that we learned in theater school.
Which was almost laughable. Like,
yeah, I think you could do a better job explaining how it is, but I understand the word to mean like when you're like if you're on a plane, that's a liminal space. Like when you're in between two locations and anything can happen.
When you're in transition.
When you're in transition, if you're on a train, but it's also applied to terms like in marriage ceremony, like when you're about to get married and you haven't said like I do yet or whatever. So like religious like ceremonies and stuff comes from that too. But you could probably speak on it a bit more in terms of 98.
Yeah, I mean, so what we learned in our dramatic literature class, this term liminality was brought up, and it was almost like I almost was like annoyed with myself when I realized that this show was going to be about liminality, because it's one of those overused kind of words in the theater world, I think. But yeah, as Thomas said, it's basically liminality is the state of being in between two states. And there's this idea of the rites of passage, which is like, a ceremonial, it usually was born in a ceremonial context. And so, yeah, so there's like the three rites of passage. I hope I get this right or else it's going to be really embarrassing. It's initiation, where you initiate something, like an act, and then separation, and then reunification. And those are the three rites of passage, the three steps you take in a liminal state. And so I was just really interested at the time in this. I guess, again, it always starts on the personal level where I feel like, okay, I feel like I'm kind of neither here nor there. It's summertime, I was still in school, and I was like, I don't really know where I am right now. I don't feel grounded in anything. I feel like something is, and there was this feeling in the world at the time. It felt like something major was about to drop, which now I guess it did, because this was like last summer, and something major did drop this year, so it was kind of spot on. But I felt like there's this tension, like something huge is going to happen. I actually haven't thought about that. Pretty good. Yeah, and so it was exploring this, like, what does it mean to be in between two states? And then all these, like, British artists, and, Canadian artists, American artists, we were all collaborating on that show, and it was really interesting. But that was definitely super theatrical. So we learned this term, and it's a huge part. I think it's a good word to know, especially when you're analyzing play texts.
Also, like when you're just on stage, that's a liminal space. When you're an actor, you go on stage. Like that's that in between. Yeah, like the off stage is like that's the other states, and then the in between stage is when you're on stage. So that's the other way I remembered us talking about.
Yeah, and also like what you were talking about the other day, or when you really do drop into a character, you're like in it. It's so liminal because you're not yourself, but you're not the it's a character, it's a representation of a person. So you're kind of like in between.
That's neat. So you guys are like dropping into the space that you aren't in, and you all become part of this working organism.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the show was like incorporating more. Was like this. Like the show was in 3 parts, and it was actually really cool because there were speakers all over the walls, and so we could make sounds like fly. And instead of like playing music and just being like, oh, cool, it's like a gimmick, we actually used sound to subconsciously like make people feel something. And so we played this like really low hum the whole time for like a section of the show. So the space started, like the vibration started to feel really heavy, and it like almost was hard to breathe. and then we made all the lights blue, and we released a scent into the space. So it made it like really heavy in all ways. And then immediately after the hour turned, the lights became pink, the sound like frequency just like stopped, and then like we released the smell of like freshly cut grass, and everyone was like, their emotions just changed instantly. And it was so interesting to talk to people and to have them be like, I don't understand why I actually feel lighter in the span of like 2 minutes. And it was just because of that. And so that's like super theatrical.
Right.
And then we had people like do movement during the show as to create the transitions between these states. And so then that was really theatrical as well.
But those were different artists that came up with this, or that was you coming up with that to have like that kind of moment go throughout that show?
I think that was more me, because I was trying to listen to what the artists were bringing and then trying to like tie it all together.
Right. So how do you, like, I have one more really great question that is always in my mind. We do like a lot of things right now. It's really the biggest topic ever, right? How do you create an audience that actually really is super diverse, right? I don't mean like only one, not only black or white, but really like, do you kind of like, is that very natural that it comes to you? I mean, obviously you are as a person of color, but does it come like supernatural that there is a diverse group of artists, or is it something that you really seek out and want?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think one of the most important things is to not, I really get upset whenever I'm in an environment and it feels like I'm just fulfilling a quota, like I'm just, we have a woman of color, great, check,
Right,
like
exactly.
I hate that feeling.
Right, I can
And I would
understand
never, it's the worst, because,
Right.
you're not a human being.
Right, exactly. Completely understand.
Yeah, it sucks.
Completely understand. Totally.
Yeah, and so with 98, like I think a big point of pride was I honestly did not even realize how diverse we were until another institution that was trying to work with us, probably shouldn't expose them, but they're not great in New York, pretty well known, was like the question that they asked, they said, how many blacks do you have?
Ooh, that's so fun.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And said, "Are you black? Are you black?" And I was like, "No." And they were like, "Oh, okay." Like,
Oh my God.
Honestly, I wanted to just now that we were like a group of diverse people.
Yeah.
That like question never even popped up. So that's horrible. Wow. I feel like it's, in order to have like a diverse group of people, you have to allow them to have a voice. Like, they're not there to fill a quota. They're not there to sort of speak on one topic. They're there to speak on whatever they want with their own voice, and that will draw everybody. As long as you're allowing them the freedom to exist the way that they are.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that was really awesome. Yes, I totally agree. This is great.
Yeah. And I think like I really encourage, I always feel weird whenever institutions are like asking about our numbers of like which races, how many races do you represent? Like it's so weird, and I understand the importance of giving, people a voice when it's necessary, but also I feel like we need to get to a point one day where we don't constantly have to like check and be like, wait, is everyone represented? Like it should just feel like a natural thing. And with 98, it really does feel like natural, like it's natural diversity.
Right.
Just to keep doing that.
No, I think that's but that's also something that I do hope that the younger generation is a lot better at,
Yeah.
like not counting, but being, right?
It's
Right.
I think it's a step that it's become a habit just because it's a step forward, I guess, from like just being totally segregated and excluding. So at least people are trying to make an effort. I just think now we're at the point where we have to take the next step. Quotas need to be done. Like
Right.
we need to stop doing that,
Right.
and we need to just ingrain inclusivity
Right.
subconsciously.
Right.
I think if you have an institution or a group of people and you like realize somewhere along the way that it's like, oh man, everybody in this group is a bunch of white men. There's something systematically wrong with the institution you created.
Right.
And you need to go and take steps to solve that. But like, I think if you've created a sound institution with like practices that don't police the way people exist, then you will find that you've created a diverse population of people to create something with.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even part of that, in my opinion, part of that like institutional issue, systemic problem is even the term people of color. I hate that term. Like I've never heard that term used before I came to the US. Because I was like, person of color, what does that like?
Right.
And then people would always like, we talked about the good sides of Peter's, but the bad side was like, especially after Trump was elected and everyone was so scared of like being on the wrong side or like saying the wrong thing, making a mistake. The amount of times I heard like, we're just so happy to have a woman of color in this room, like, good job. Like, it was so weird because I was like, I'm also like a person with thoughts and feelings and like, I'm not just a woman of color. Like I hate that I've been confined to this box of a term.
I know.
So I think we need
But
to like get rid of that.
But
I
it's
understand
very
here.
hard because what else? Anything, even especially as a white person, I think, an older white person, and being from Austria, like it's really hard to find the right terms.
It
On
is.
how are you gonna? I mean, right. Like
I don't even have the answers.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I don't
Because-
necessarily do.
There's certainly many. Yeah. But it's true. I mean, I don't really necessarily find it very appealing either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like not even right. But yeah, no, that was great. I think actually we probably went way over, right? Yeah,
Oh
it's
my gosh.
12:30. But that was really awesome, and I'm just gonna stop the recording now. Somebody
Thanks,
was.
JJ. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right. So how am I stop the recording? I think it was awesome.
Thanks.
I hope that the recording is gonna be good.
Yeah, I'll like edit it. But no.